Hello and welcome back to Ganga Education. On this platform, you will find quality lectures relating to the field of law, competitive examination in legal domain, important legal facts and legal history, all explained in clear and structured manner. This video is divided in two parts. In first part, we are going to discuss Bharatiya Sakshya Adhiniyam section number 4 and 5, and in next part we will deal with section number 6. Let's get started.
Today, we're going to break down a really fascinating legal principle that helps courts get to the truth by looking at the whole story, not just a single moment in time. Okay, so let's just dive right in with a question that courts have to grapple with every single day. When a crime happens, what evidence is actually allowed in court? Is it just the main event itself, the final act? Or is it everything that happened before, during, and even after?
Well, the key to answering that question lies in a pretty old Latin term, res gestae. It might sound complicated, but the idea behind it is powerful and simple. To truly understand any one event, you've got to see the whole picture, the whole story connected to it.
So what does this fancy phrase actually mean? Well, res gestae literally translates to things done. And in the legal world, that means we're not just talking about the main event, like a crime or a dispute. We're talking about everything that's part of the same transaction, everything that helps explain it.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting for us in India. If you look through our new evidence law, the Bharatiya Sakshya Adhiniyam of 2023, you won't actually find the term res gestae written anywhere. But its spirit? It's absolutely there, woven into some really key sections that we're about to get into.
So let's start with Section 4 of the Act. You can think of this as the real heart of the matter in Indian law. This is where we get the rule of the same transaction.
Okay, I know the wording on the screen might sound a little lawyery, but the idea is actually pretty straightforward. It means that any fact, even if it isn't the main crime itself, becomes important. It becomes relevant if it's connected so closely that it's all part of one continuous story.
And what's so fascinating here is just how broad the idea of a transaction really is. It's not just one thing that happens at one time in one place. Nope, it can stretch across different times and different locations. It covers not just what people did, the physical stuff, but also what they said. The only real rule is that all these different pieces have to be connected to the main event.
This image here is the perfect way to picture it. Think of a transaction like a chain. Maybe the big question for the court is whether the final link, the delivery, happened. But to prove that, every single link before it, every step of the journey, is a relevant fact. That's how it works.
All right, so the theory is one thing, but how does this actually hold up in a real courtroom? To see it in action, let's look at a real case that made its way all the way to the Supreme Court, Hadu versus the state of Orissa.
So here's the setup. A man named Bhim Panda has been murdered, and another man, Hadu, is the one accused. The whole case hinges on a key witness, someone who was just passing by Hadu's house late one night, around 10 o'clock.
Now, as this witness is trying to get past with his cart, he finds his way is blocked. And then he hears an unknown person say, "A dead body is loaded on the cart, take the sideway." I mean, just imagine hearing that in the dark. It's pretty chilling.
And here's the big legal problem. The witness had no idea who said that. He couldn't identify the speaker. So the question for the court was, can you really use a statement from a complete stranger as evidence to convict a man of murder?
And the court's answer was a clear yes. The statement was allowed. And why? Because those words weren't just some random out-of-the-blue comment. They were spoken right in the middle of the crime, as the body was being disposed of. They were part of the same transaction. They were another link in that chain.
So, Section 4 is all about facts that are part of the main event itself. But the law goes even bigger. Let's widen the lens now and look at Section 5, which is all about understanding the context, the cause and effect surrounding an event.
This part is all about the before and after. It tells us that any facts that created the opportunity for the event to happen, the cause, or any facts that happened because of it, the effect, are also relevant evidence. It helps the court see the full context. Let's make that real with an example. Say a man gets robbed. Well, the fact that just before the robbery, he was at a fair, showing a bunch of people that he had a lot of money on him, that becomes a relevant fact. It's not the robbery itself, but it provided the opportunity, the cause, for it to happen.
And it works the other way too, looking at the effect. Imagine a murder scene. The police find marks on the ground showing that there was a struggle. Those footprints, those scuff marks, they are relevant facts because they are a direct result, a direct effect of the crime that took place there. So we've gone through Section 4 on the same transaction and Section 5 on cause and effect. So what? What's the big takeaway here? Why does the law care so much about all these connected details?
At the end of the day, it really all comes down to one thing. You can't have justice in a vacuum. These rules exist to make sure that a court doesn't just look at one tiny piece of the puzzle in isolation. They force the entire legal system to take a step back and look at the whole story, the full context, before making a decision that could change someone's life forever.
And that leaves us with one final fascinating thought. We know that getting to the truth is all about the details, but this whole idea also raises a really tough question. Where do you draw the line? How many details are too many? And finding that delicate balance is something judges have to do every single day.
In this part 2, we are going to deal with section number 6 of Bharatiya Sakshya Adhiniyam 2023.
In the pursuit of justice, our courts are often flooded with information. But how do they sift through it all? How do they separate a truly relevant fact from just distracting noise? Well, a huge part of the answer lies within a specific rule of evidence. In this explainer, we are going to do a deep dive into Section 6 of the Indian Evidence Act to really understand how the law filters information to get to the truth.
So here's our game plan. We'll start with a big question of relevance itself. Then we'll decode Section 6, breaking it down into its 3 key parts: motive, preparation, and conduct. We'll also look at some real-world examples, clarify a really important distinction about what conduct isn't, and then we'll wrap it all up with the main takeaways.
Okay, so let's start with a fundamental challenge that every court faces. It can't just consider every single piece of information thrown at it. That would be chaos. There has to be a filter, and that filter is the legal concept of relevance. It's the framework for deciding what's logically connected to the case, and just as importantly, what needs to be left out.
And this gets us right to the heart of the matter, a question that every legal system has to wrestle with. When does a person's background, or their reasons for doing something, or even their behavior before and after an event, when does it actually matter in figuring out what happened? You can see it's a very fine line to walk.
The answer to that question, at least within the Indian Evidence Act, is found right here, in Section 6. This is what lays out the rules for when a person's motive, their preparation, and their conduct can be brought in as relevant evidence. So let's break it down. Here's the first part of the law itself. And notice how direct it is. It says any fact is relevant which shows or constitutes a motive or preparation. What that means is that any piece of evidence that helps explain why someone might have done something or how they got ready to do it is considered fair game in the courtroom. So you can really think of Section 6 as being built on these 3 pillars. They're like the building blocks of relevance. You've got motive, the why, you've got preparation, the how, and you've got conduct, which is all about the person's behavior surrounding the event. So first up, motive. Now, this isn't about the act itself, but the reason behind it. It's the why. Think of it as the emotional fuel for the fire. Things like revenge or greed or jealousy. The law says that this why is a very relevant piece of the overall puzzle. All right, next is preparation. This part covers all the things someone does before the main event to make it happen. It's all about showing that arrangements were made, that plans were in motion, maybe that tools were acquired. Facts like these make it seem much more likely that the person actually committed the act.
And finally, we have conduct. This is all about the behavior of a person involved in the case. But here's the key. That behavior has to be influenced by the facts of the case, or have an influence on them. It's about how a person acts when the central facts of the case are in play.
Okay, so theory is one thing, right? But let's see how all this actually plays out in practice. We're going to look at a few classic illustrations from legal cases to see exactly how courts apply these ideas of motive and preparation. In our first example, let's say A is on trial for murdering B. Now, the court learns that B had been extorting A for some time. That fact is incredibly relevant because it establishes a really powerful motive. A had a very clear reason to want B out of the picture. This is a perfect textbook example of the motive pillar in action. Now, let's look at an example of preparation. If A is on trial for poisoning B, the fact that A went out and bought a similar type of poison just before B's death is highly relevant. It's not the crime itself, but it's a clear preparatory step. It's an action that points directly toward the eventual crime. And this principle isn't just for criminal law. Imagine a dispute over a will. The fact that the person, before they died, had been researching wills, talking to lawyers, or looking over drafts, all of those actions would be considered relevant. They show clear preparation and an intent to create that will.
So, we've covered motive and preparation. Now it's time for that third pillar, conduct. Let's dig into how a person's behavior, their actions, can become incredibly powerful evidence in a courtroom.
This one's a classic. If a person is accused of a crime and they're caught doing things like destroying evidence, hiding materials, or maybe even trying to intimidate witnesses, all of that is considered relevant conduct. The law basically infers that these actions come from a sense of guilt. Here's another really great illustration. Imagine someone yells, "The police are coming," and a person nearby immediately bolts and runs away. That act of fleeing, that's considered relevant conduct. And why? Because that behavior is a direct reaction to the idea of getting caught, which is obviously central to the case. And this is a super important point. Relevant conduct isn't just about what happens before an act. It can also be about what happens after. For example, if a person is found with stolen property right after a robbery, that possession is considered relevant conduct. It creates a direct link between them and the crime. Now, this is a critical detail, so listen closely. A person's conduct is relevant, sure, but so are the statements that cause that conduct. Remember that example of running from the police? Well, the statement itself, "the police are coming," is also relevant because it explains why the person ran. The statement and the action are linked. But the law has to be extremely precise. While actions can speak volumes, the law puts a pretty strict limit on what kind of statements can be considered conduct. This is a common point of confusion, so let's clear it up right now. And right here is where the law draws a crucial line. A statement, all by itself, is generally not considered conduct under Section 6. It only becomes relevant when it actually comes with and explains an action. In other words, words alone are not enough. They have to be tied to a deed. This side-by-side comparison makes the distinction crystal clear. On one hand, actually going to the authorities and formally making a complaint after a crime, well, that's an act. That act, including the words you use in the complaint, is relevant conduct. But on the other hand, just casually telling a friend you were robbed without the accompanying act of making an official complaint is not considered conduct under this specific rule. So let's bring all of this together. We've seen that Section 6 gives us a really clear framework for figuring out what's relevant in court based on a person's motives, their preparations, and their actions.
So, what are the core ideas you should take away from this? First, those three pillars, motive, preparation, and conduct, they help build a logical story, a narrative for the court. Second, the timeline is everything. Actions before, during, and after an event can all be brought in as evidence. Third, always remember that crucial distinction. It's about what you do, not just what you say. And finally, all of this really hinges on context. The same fact can be totally relevant in one case and completely irrelevant in another. And that leaves us with one final thought to consider. This careful, structured approach to evidence, it isn't just a legal technicality. It actually serves a dual purpose. So the question to think about is this. How does this very precise way of filtering information manage to protect the rights of the individual while at the same time allowing the court to effectively get to the truth?
Thank you for watching this session. If you found this lecture useful, do like, share and subscribe to Ganga Education. Keep learning, keep growing and stay connected for more law lectures.